With no further delay or ado, I want to introduce our speaker today, Ashley Kite-Rowland, who's going to talk about green space and childhood development. I'm going to let her introduce herself, but I will say one thing. She's probably the most passionate person in the state of Tennessee on this issue, and she's got a wealth of knowledge that I think will inspire you and help expand your awareness of this incredible benefit of our urban forests. So, Ashley.
So hi, my name is Ashley Kite-Rowland. Thank you so much for the introduction, Neil. I don't know if I'm the most passionate person in Tennessee that has this about this subject, but I'm definitely one of them. And I'm really delighted to be here today to talk to all of you. I am currently serving as the partnership coordinator for the Tennessee Urban Forestry Council. So honestly, being able to do this presentation with you today has gotten me back connected to research I did for my master's degree. So it's been fun this week preparing for this talk. And another thing on this talk, so my thesis research is based upon children's development in the natural world. I did not set this talk up so that it would be like a research talk, because sometimes those can get in the weeds and be boring. So my talk will be very conversational. I'm going to hit the high points because this is a really vast body of research. And my goal today is just to share ideas with you that I found really intriguing and that have inspired me in the work that I'm wanting to do. And I hope that everyone walks away just knowing that maybe the work you're already doing makes a huge impact in the world and will make an impact way into the future. Or if you're not doing work in this area, maybe it will inspire you to make a difference in your own yard, community, state, different things. Maybe you'll just talk about it with someone else and that will make a difference. So a little bit about me. I have lived in Tennessee my entire life. I was born in East Tennessee. I was raised in Knoxville, but I spent a lot of time in the mountains up near Sevierville with my grandparents. I spent a lot of time outdoors, gardening with my parents or grandparents, going to the lake, riding my bike, and it was great. And I do think the person I am today, the seeds were sown very early in life with the amount of time that I spent outdoors. I wound up in Middle Tennessee during college. I got my degree in cultural anthropology. I wasn't really thinking about what kind of career I wanted to have. I just knew that I liked the subject. And so I wanted to learn as much about it as possible. However, the things I learned in cultural anthropology have really impacted my ability to work in different sectors. I went into domestic violence and sexual assault work after that, and I engaged with people from all different walks of life. So that was a difficult experience, but it was rewarding. And I did spend a lot of time in nature to deal with the stress from that work. We moved out to West Tennessee about 8 years ago. And out here, I did get my master's degree at UT Martin. And in that time period, or during my master's degree, I was focusing on child development and the importance of access to the natural world. Just about me generally, I love nature, I love learning, and I really love community engagement. And what I mean by that is I like participating in the communities where I live or in the state that I live in. I feel very lucky to have a job that allows me to engage with communities. I feel like it's one of the best things about being human is that we have the ability to impact the world that we live in a positive way. And so I like for my life to be all about that. And this work with children is definitely connected to that. So when I was doing my research on children's development in the natural world, one thing I realized is that we throw terms around a lot, but we don't really define them. I did that because I was looking at the natural world and childcare spaces. And so then I had to figure out what that meant. So for this talk, what I mean about green space is vegetated land. So this is a definition from UNICEF that I found this week, but I particularly want to point out that I'm talking about parks, I'm talking about home areas that children have access to, school and community gardens, playgrounds, and also school grounds in general where children play. So all those street trees and things like that are super important. Mostly what I'm focused on are areas that are distinguished as areas for children to play in. And this is just an outline of my talk. So first, I'll talk about the importance of early childhood. Then I'll get into the benefits of green space, barriers to children's access, and I will really focus in on the importance of childcare centers in school settings. And then I'll end with existing initiatives and ideas and hopefully ways that you all can get engaged. But before I get started, I want to recognize the inspiration for this work. So I did say the seeds for my interest in the natural world were sown very early in my life. However, I never really thought about children until I had my own. So these are my two children. This picture was taken 7 years ago, but in having children, they are the ones that opened my eyes up to children's development and children's play spaces. And I look at childcare centers so much differently now that I have children. Honestly, before, when I would drive by a childcare center, I didn't really pay any attention to the outdoor environment. But since having children, I do see the world in new ways. So I'm really appreciative of them and the opportunity to be their mom. So this is pretty basic. I mean, everyone knows, I think everyone knows, children develop in stages, and there are different ones, and we use pretty much the same language when we're talking about it. You have infancy, like where you're holding your babies, they begin to walk and toddle around, then they go off to school. And when I was looking at this week, it said adolescence was 10 to 19, and I felt really shocked that adolescence starts that early. However, it fits with what I'm talking about today, because I am primarily going to be talking about early childhood, which is ages 0 to 8. And if you think about age 0 to 8, if you look at the picture at the bottom of the screen, there are incredible amounts of development going on during that time. In the picture, it shows a baby just lifting its head and kind of learning to crawl, all the way up to a child who is moving around. So my daughter is 7. When I think about her 7 years ago, holding her in my arms, she couldn't lift her head up very early on. And now I watch her play soccer, and she's great at soccer. So those are just physical developments, but there are also so many other developments. There's cognitive development, social, emotional, and we have the potential to impact these in numerous ways. So why do I focus on early childhood? I mean, adolescence is super important too, but childhood, I feel like, is a really special time in a human's life because they're learning what it means to be human. So when we grow up, we're born into a specific place and time. So my experience of childhood and my daughter's experience of childhood is going to be different than it would be if she grew up in another culture or in another century. So they're learning what it means to be human in a specific place and time, and it is the most rapid period of human development. 80% of neural connectivity occurs before the age of 3. A lot of this is pruned, and we do have neuroplasticity. However, the architectural foundation of our brain is laid in this very early period of life. And it's this and the things that we learn, like acquiring language, that impact our entire lifespan. Even things that happen early in life can impact our health and well-being way on into life. That doesn't mean that we can't change things. It just means that we should do our best to optimize this period of development because of the lifespan, the impact over the lifespan. So how do children develop? Like, how do they learn? Well, there's been a long-standing debate, is it nature or nurture? And I love to say that it's actually both. So we are born with certain genes and we have predispositions, but our inner world and our bodies are in constant interaction with the outside world. So in the outside world, we have the sociocultural world, and we also have the biophysical world. And it is through these interactions that our neural connectivity is shaped. So if we have a lot of stress, it can impact the structure of our brain. We also feel this as adults. When we have stress, we feel the impact in our bodies. Oftentimes it impacts our immune system and things like that. It's the same for children. So children have these interactions going on internally and externally, and through this really complex interplay, development occurs. This happens both passively and actively. So research shows if you look out a window and you can see green space, that impacts your sense of well-being. That's a passive engagement. An active engagement would be if you're up and you're touching a tree, pine cones, collecting acorns, things like that. So both of these impact children, but play and active engagement with the world is the way in which children learn. It is their most important work, and it's the way that they're most learning to be human. You can see this when you see children mimicking what they see other people doing or adults doing, or if they are like, children always repeat the things that you don't want them to say. So they're seeing things go on, they're internalizing it and acting it out as they're learning what it means to be alive. So that's complex in that they have internal and external interactions going on that are influencing their development. However, we live in a really complex world, and our world has lots of different levels to it. So in this social system, there's lots of different levels, and you can't really demonstrate this complexity on a screen, but I do like to use Bronfenbrenner's model just to show how all these things can impact a developing child. So children are impacted by their family, they're impacted by their school, their neighborhood, they're impacted by government and government decisions, educational systems. They're also impacted by beliefs and ideologies of society. And all these things are interacting with one another. So it is complex, all the different things that can impact children's development. And again, it is relative to time and place. With this being said, how can we optimize children's development when we do have so many things going on in society that makes it so that they do experience chronic stress? And chronic stress has been shown to impact children's ability to reach like full health. So if you're experiencing chronic stress, then it can impact your brain development, it can impact your mental health, it can impact your physical well-being. So how can we optimize children's development when we have really big problems going on in society? So this week I pulled up just a few statistics to give you. So in America, nearly 11 million children are experiencing poverty, and that's from 2021. So that's 1 in 7 kids. Poverty is a really stressful experience. Children are also experiencing racism, which causes chronic stress and can impact their ability to be healthy and to have good mental health. Children, 1 in 5 children in adolescence, and this is from 2021 in the United States, are experiencing childhood obesity. And that's a new problem that we have. And in 2020, 2.9 million households were experiencing food insecurity, and 6.1 million, and this included 6.1 million children. So food insecurity, racism, gun violence, poverty, living in a neighborhood that is kind of rough, all of these things are impacting our children's development. And we have to find ways to optimize this, but these are social problems that we've been working on addressing for a long time. And it doesn't seem like there are any solutions that we can agree on that are coming anytime soon. So what I find interesting is research is showing that nature cannot change these social problems. However, it can mitigate the impact and buffer the impact of stress that children have, because nature can be a restorative place. It can be a place of healing. It can be a place of engagement. And it does things like reduce cortisol levels and things like that. So I found this in a pediatrics article this week, and I found it striking that this was the last sentence, is that pediatricians should advocate for equitable nature contact for children in places where they live, play, and learn. And equitable access, because not all children have the same access to these spaces. So now I'll get into just the benefits of green space to children's health. So first we'll talk about the physical development and your physical health. I think this is the one that people probably are more aware of or have experienced. So when you see children playing in green space, oftentimes they're more physically active. So they have increased physical activity. Their activities are much more diverse than they would be on a play structure. So if you think about a play structure, the activity that people have or children can participate in on a play structure is very structured, right? I mean, there's certain things that you're supposed to do as you're engaging with the play structure. Parents, I can always hear parents say, you don't go up the slide, you go down the slide. Well, why? Like, why do they have to go down the slide? So when children are engaged with play structures, it's much more confined than when they're in green space. So there is more diversity in physical activity, increased activity. This can help develop their motor skills, their coordination, balance, and agility. But because of that increased physical activity, that helps their cardiovascular system. It can help prevent obesity and maintain a good weight. Interestingly, also just being outside helps with nearsightedness. And it does help children sleep better too. And throughout this presentation, so I'll talk about green space, and I will also allude to farm to school activities because having gardens is also part of green space. So when children are engaged in garden-based learning at school or at home or whatever, they have better nutrition typically, and they have increased access to fruits and vegetables, but they also are more willing to try the fruits and vegetables when they are participating in growing them. So green space also impacts children's mental health in a positive way. I think we began hearing a lot about this during COVID and how green space impacted adults, and adults were trying to get access to it, and there wasn't equal access to these spaces. So children are the same way. When children are in green space, they perceive themselves as having less stress. So again, this goes back to the fact that many children are growing up in really stressful experiences. So being in green space helps them to cope with these stressful events. It fosters resiliency, and it can also buffer the impact that the chronic stress has on their development. Children have lower rates of depression and anxiety in green space. For children that have ADHD, and when they are in the natural world, they are better able to moderate their behavior and to deal with the issues that they may have in the classroom. Also, interestingly, I found that children who have lots of time in green space are less likely to develop psychiatric disorders in adolescence and adulthood. And one thing that I mentioned earlier to the people that are hosting the talk that I'll say now is I didn't put all my references in the slide because it was bulky, but after today, I will send it to them and we will have all the references available so that you all can go and check out these articles. So I talked about mental health. Well, green space is good for cognitive development too. And I feel like with children, we do want them to be healthy, but we really want our children to learn. We want good test scores. We want them to learn how to read. We want them to learn how to do math and to speak properly and things like that. Well, green space can help with that. It does help with academic performance, even when children can see green space outside of the windows at school, which doesn't happen very often anymore because due to safety issues and just the way we design buildings. But if they can see green space, even if they're not in it, it can help with their academic performance. But when they do go outside, it helps. It helps them have a break, and then they do better on test scores and their schoolwork when they go back inside. Children who participate in outdoor educational experiences usually demonstrate an increased enthusiasm for learning because hands-on experiences are ways that are fun to learn and that children like to be engaged in. And we are seeing an emphasis on this in schools now, but it is not something that is widely available for all children. And for farm to school, so in farm to school, when you're engaged in gardening, it's more than just growing food. You're learning about the whole ecosystem. So there are lots of linkages there to science, agriculture, ecology, and you can make those linkages when learning in nature to all different subjects within a school. And that little girl in the picture is doing like a bark rubbing. So she's learning about bark, and that was a really fun day. When children play together in green space, it helps them develop communication and social skills. So one really interesting study that I came upon is that when children are playing in these open spaces and in green space, the leaders that may be the leaders, like on a play structure, are not necessarily the leaders in like an open green space. And what I mean by leader is usually you have children that are kind of dominant. So on a play structure, it tends to be the ones with more physical abilities. So the ones that are strong and can do the monkey bars, and maybe they're the fastest and that kind of thing. So they tend to be like the dominant leaders of the group. However, when the same group of children go to a green space to play, other children have opportunities to be the lead because oftentimes there's much more dramatic, imaginative, and creative play. So maybe a child's strengths are more in that area than their ability to go across the monkey bars. So it fosters this sense of social cohesion, and it provides inclusion for children who may not be included on just a play structure. And also, because play is not prescribed to be a certain way in green spaces without the play structures, then children have to figure out how to navigate these spaces together and also how to engage in play. So they're having to use their critical thinking skills, but they're also having to communicate to their peers so that they can figure out how to come together and play with one another. This is the last one, just quickly. So on the benefits of green space. So green space, it provides different sensory experiences. So children, just like all humans, we're engaging with the world through our senses. And when we have green space, there's especially diverse green space, there are so many different ways that our senses are engaged. And this is a really cool thing, like whether you're looking at different bark patterns on trees, different leaves, you have different smells, colors, and textures. Looking at leaves on the ground is very different than stomping through them and hearing them crunch. So having these sensory experiences makes a difference. Having these experiences, research has shown, helps children feel more connected to the natural world and develop an environmental consciousness. What I mean by this is just that they have a greater awareness for the environment, and they also feel a sense of connection to it. And as they get older, they are more likely to want to spend time in these spaces, but also to take care of it. So this is really important for people that work in that work with the natural world, like in urban and community forestry. So if I want to make sure that the trees that we're planting are preserved over long term, it would be really good if I knew that future leaders were going to care about preserving those spaces. Well, one way to help influence that is to ensure that children have access to nature and green spaces, because then they will be more likely to care about those spaces as they get older. So since green space is so good for children, why do we have barriers to accessing these spaces? I think some people think that rural kids have lots of access to green space, and that's not exactly true, because when we're talking about green space, again, I said you can have passive access where you see it, and that's beneficial, but active access to this space is much more important. So in urban areas, you may just not have access. Like there may not be passive or active access to the spaces. Like there's no street trees, you don't have access to a park and that kind of thing. Well, in rural areas, you can have passive access, and it's much more likely that we do. However, that doesn't mean that we can engage in those spaces. For example, where I live, big agricultural area, so there may be huge cornfields or cotton fields that I can see, but I'm not necessarily going to engage in those spaces. And parks may not be readily available. So barriers are experienced in both urban and rural settings for active engagement in green spaces. It also depends on the neighborhood you live in. We know that many neighborhoods were redlined and that they don't have trees and they didn't have a lot of the services that other parts of communities had. And some neighborhoods are invested in and some aren't. Some neighborhoods may be newly developed and the developers may not have planted trees. So this impacts the amount of green space around people's homes. There could be that there's an awesome park across on the other side of the county or something, but you don't have a car to get there. And as a kid, you would have to have transportation to get there anyway. So if you don't have public transport and you're a child and you can't go by yourself and there isn't an adult that wants to go with you, then you don't have access to the green space. There are also social and cultural issues. Some people don't feel safe going to some parts of town to go to the park, or they don't feel welcome. Some people don't feel safe going on a greenway by themselves, or maybe it's just not really something that they would do within their community. And so we have to think about these things when we're working toward providing equitable access to parks and to green spaces. So we want to find the places and make sure that all communities have access. However, we do need to engage directly with the community so that we understand what they want, where they want it, and how they want to engage with it. But even if there is lots of green space, there are still barriers to access. And that's mainly just because of the way we live our lives nowadays. You could have green space like a block away, but you could never see it. And why is that? Well, for children are spending lots more time on the screen. This, the thing from Common Sense Media that is up on the screen, it's 2 hours and 19 minutes daily. That's for children 0 to 8, and that's just an average amount of time that children were spending on the screen. Also, for many children, they're pretty busy. They're playing soccer, they're playing baseball, maybe they're in theater. We have our children booked out. Not all children have access to these after-school and enrichment activities, but many that do have lots going on. Children need to sleep, and the doctors say, you need to have this many hours of sleep, and so you're trying to meet that. And also children are spending lots of time in childcare and school settings. So in 2010, I'm sure it's changed a little bit when a mom was employed, children were spending 33 hours in a childcare setting. An average school day now, my daughter is there 35 hours a week, and then she goes to after school because we work. So really she's putting in about 42 hours a week in her school setting. And research has indicated that when children are with their parents, that parents aren't necessarily providing these opportunities for them to engage in green spaces. When they are providing opportunity, oftentimes it's through structured activities like, hey, we're going to soccer practice or a soccer game, something like that. It's not that they're providing them opportunities just to free play at the park. And I'm a parent, I get that, because after school, that's the crazy time of day. We got dinner, we have to get ready for bed, we have homework, maybe we have soccer or something like that. So parents really don't have a whole lot of time to provide their children adequate access to green space because of our busy lives. Because of this, it's really important that we work toward providing green space for children in childcare and school settings. At least that's what I think. And in the US, there are approximately 114,000 childcare centers, and there are lots of schools too. And also providing green space for children at schools helps address the issues of equity, because we do have public education that is available. So the importance of childcare centers in like early childhood and access to nature has been on the radar for lots of people. When I first started my thesis research, I came upon this survey. I was really interested in nature preschools and forest kindergartens. However, I did not have access to anything like this where I live. So I found this survey and I was interested in where they were developing. So in 2017, they found about 250 nature preschools and forest kindergartens operating across the country. And look, those children are doing really cool things with nature. Like, I want to go to school there. However, when I looked at this survey, I found that it was mostly white children that were getting access to these cool programs. And we wanted to do a little bit further research into this, and we still intend to. But what this looks like, or looked like to me back in 2017, 2018, is an issue that is reflecting what we know to be educational and environmental justice issues, like that not all children have access to those types of educational programs or those environmental goods. So some children may be playing at a park like this or a play space, lots of trees there, it's winter. Some may be in a place like this. That's really lovely grass. There's trees. But not all children are, and not all neighborhoods have access to parks and things like that. And that's widely documented, that there is inequitable access to environmental goods and exposures to bads based upon race and class, like within our country. It's also been documented that early childhood programs are not, they are typically of lower quality in disadvantaged communities. And I put that citation in there because I'm not just saying that, like that's what this person had said. And then interestingly, this week when I was trying to get prepared for this presentation, I was looking at the new farm to school research from 2021, and schools that had higher rates of free and reduced lunch are less likely to participate in farm to school programming. And so this kind of makes me think about issues of access that we know exist, but we need to work toward addressing. And I'll show you a picture. So I was on my way home from Nashville on Monday, and I wanted some pictures of childcare centers that I usually see. And I did not go out of my way to take this picture. It was just on the road. So I'm not picking on these places at all. But this was one outdoor play space that I saw. That's a really cool play structure. There is no green in that space. They can see trees. There is place for shade, so that is good. And then this was another one. And again, I was not going out of the way. I'm actually on the road. The picture is a little dark, but there are no trees. This play space is right by the road. They do have grass, but there's really no place for shade. So this is where, these are the types of spaces where many children play. So it's not that tree-filled, really green grass area. And in seeing things like this, that's what inspired my research when I was in graduate school. So I saw the nature preschools and the forest kindergartens, thought they were super cool. And then I would drive by childcare settings where that is not where people were playing or kids were playing. So I wanted to understand like how likely that was occurring. Did other children have access to green space? Were there issues of equity that were going on? So what I did with my thesis research is I looked at the childcare system in Tennessee and tried to figure out like what all impacted the childcare center. And it's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of regulations. They have to be licensed, they're assessed. They have to deal with lots of different things. So I looked at the system, and then I looked at 71 childcare centers environments. And this is where I got into the issue of what's the natural world and natural elements. Well, the natural world is both living and non-living things. So thinking about vegetation, we can focus in on that here. So I looked at 71 different schools, and I was looking in the environment they had access to, so the active environment. So they may have trees outside of the playground, but inside of the playground. So of the 71, only 25 had a tree. So 35%, and then only 12 had more than one tree in these outside environments. Only 3 had gardens, and those were flower gardens. And I mean, you all can read the rest of that. Indoors, they were more likely to have plants indoors than outdoors. And I found this really sad and interesting, because in knowing that green space is super important, and active engagement with green space is even more important than passive, what I was seeing is that the children that attended these places did not have that access. So what I found is that most of the outdoor environments that I looked at did not include aspects of the natural world and did not have much green space. The children that attended the centers weren't really spending much time outdoors. There is a minimum amount of time that they had to spend, but that wasn't necessarily followed, and it's still much of the time was indoors. And interestingly, having trees was in some ways disincentivized because childcare centers could get, it would be documented that a root was sticking out from a tree and that it was a trip hazard for children. So notions of safety and risk were an issue, because maybe if there's sticks and nuts on the ground, maybe that is a safety hazard in the minds of some people. So this, the concentration on safety and risk can disincentivize childcare centers and schools from putting these green spaces in. But quality and the ranking of quality, so childcare centers in Tennessee, like most states, have quality rankings, like it's a star system here. But the stars, so you could have really high stars in Tennessee and be a really high quality program, but you could have zero green space and nature included in your environment. And I thought that that's really sad. And that shows that, you know, change needs to happen at many different levels of the childcare system. But it wasn't that people just don't want green space. There are barriers to knowledge, like not all childcare centers are thinking about that. They're thinking about keeping children safe and providing access and a clean space and a fun space for children. Also, there are financial barriers. Maybe a childcare center owner can't afford to have this really diverse green space outdoors and maintain it, because maintenance is an issue. Parents don't always want their children engaging in nature. I saw notes of parents where parents were saying they didn't want their children to get muddy. So they didn't want their children to go outside when it was wet or rainy. Well, that's a large part of the year. So it's not just that children don't have access to green spaces at these places. It is that sometimes, even if they do, a barrier may be there that they don't want the children to get wet or dirty or be too cold or be too hot. So all these things can impact children's access to green spaces, even if they are there in childcare and school settings. So again, it requires changes on many different levels of society for this to be addressed in a widespread manner. So going back to this, so not only is the developing child embedded within this really complex system, so is the school. So the school is impacted by the parents, by the children, but also by the regulations and the expectations from society. And also there's economic issues, like running a childcare center is super expensive, and childcare workers don't really make a whole lot of money, that you can't up tuition because then parents can't afford it. And so if you are making more money, where do you invest it? Do you invest it in the childcare workers, or do you invest it in the environment? So that is another barrier to changing the outdoor environments of schools and childcare centers. Actually, more childcare centers, because schools are publicly funded, but still it's the same. There's issues with money. So in the next part, what I want to talk about are things that are going on. So no, children don't have a whole lot of access to green space, but there are lots of different movements and initiatives going on in our country that are working to address this. And so at the end of this, I'll talk about these things, and hopefully some of them will pique your interest, and then we'll have questions. I'm gonna get a drink of water. So green schoolyards is a really cool movement that started, and I really like it because it works to not only provide children access to green space and to get the many benefits from green space that they get from the spaces, they also work to address issues within cities. So if there are stormwater issues on a school site, Green Schoolyards wants to include addressing that within the design of the outdoor spaces. They're wanting to promote wildlife habitat. They're wanting to provide access to trees for all the reasons that I have discussed, but also they want these spaces to be community centers. So it's not just for children that are going to school during the day, and the teachers are getting those benefits too, but they are advocating for these spaces to be open to the community after school hours so it can help address these issues of equity when you don't have parks nearby. So a community may not have a park, but they have a school. So if the school's playground is super awesome and is a green space and is open after hours, that allows more people to have access to green space, and thus their health and well-being are impacted in a positive way. The next one I want you all to know about is the Natural Learning Initiative. I had the opportunity to take a class with them this summer. It was on early childhood learning environments. So it was outdoor learning environments and how to create the spaces so that children want to engage, but also it connects them to nature and enhances their health and well-being. I first became aware of this organization when I was doing my thesis because I was looking at something that they had developed to measure quality in the in childcare spaces. So quality is measured by the state with a certain tool right now, but it doesn't really look at how much of the natural world nature is included. So the Natural Learning Initiative has this other assessment tool called POEMS that does look at the natural world and how much is included in these spaces and is assessing quality based upon that. So I looked into that with my thesis research. And then, like I said, I took the class this summer. They have other classes for landscape designers and architects, so you can learn how to design these spaces. But the one that I took was for people who work in childcare, advocates, and people that don't necessarily have drafting abilities. Another cool thing that they offer here is a plant database, and it shows the benefits that it has to children's learning, but also the function that it can serve in these outdoor learning environments, whether it's edible, whether it provides sensory experience, that kind of thing. They do provide design assistance and toolkits. And one of the projects that I find interesting that they're working on is preventing obesity by design. So it's looking at how we design these environments at childcare centers and schools and designing them in a way where it enhances physical activity so that, and also provides access to maybe fruits and vegetables that are grown there, and then influences children's health and well-being in a way that hopefully obesity is prevented due to their engagement with physical activity, etc. The Children in Nature Network, this is a really large organization, and all of these are interconnected. They work together because they're all working toward common goals. So you'll see a lot of them partnering on projects or mentioning one another on their websites. But one reason to go to the Children in Nature Network is because they have a research library that is really easily accessible, and they have a great search function. So you can search for different topics within this realm of research that's going on. It is very much up to date. They have the new research that they're uploading pretty frequently. They also have a conference and events, and so you can link with other people across the country interested in this type of work. One of the oldest organizations is the North American Association for Environmental Education. They've been around for 50 years. And they started the Natural Start Alliance. So the survey that I mentioned earlier on nature preschools and forest kindergartens, that was done partly through the Natural Start Alliance. And what they're really working towards is getting children's educational experiences to be in nature. So not having it in the classroom and then you go outside to play, not to have learning, but they're trying to flip that so that classes are held outside and nature is utilized as a tool for learning, because there's so many different ways that it can be used in that way. The National Farm to School Network is really active throughout the country. They offer lots of resources. They're very organized. This picture is actually Farm to School project in Murfreesboro. It looks like they're harvesting, I can't really tell, is it lettuce, greens? I know they do grow a lot of greens in Murfreesboro, but Farm to School projects are funded through the USDA, and they also fund projects related to early childhood education. So it's working to get gardens in these spaces so that children can learn how food grows. One organization I came upon that was super interesting is the Giving Grove. I connected with them through my work at TUFC, but they help fund local orchards. So they partner with nonprofits to put in these orchards. They will train them on how to care for the trees. And actually they do provide the trees as well. And what they do is they want the food that the orchards produce to go to people who are food insecure or lack access to fresh fruits. And actually they were looking for a partner in Tennessee a couple of years ago. So hopefully they found one. If not, some nonprofits had checked them out. And one that tree people may be more familiar with is Arbor Day has the Tree City program where communities can be tree cities. Or recently, they also started tree campus recognition for K through 12 institutions. There are certain things that schools have to do to qualify for this recognition. They're there on the screen, but it's not difficult. And through the Tennessee Urban Forestry Council, we are working with this program in one of our new grants that we received, which is called Growing Communities. So we're wanting to pilot projects in Knoxville and Memphis, where we look at the tree canopy coverage in areas where there is lack of tree canopy coverage. So, and then there's the social demographic issues that show that there is inequitable access based upon, social demographic reasons. We're wanting to find the schools in those areas and partner with them to green their outdoor environments, but also to work towards certification as tree campuses. This will be through community engagement, so we'll identify community leaders to help lead these projects, but it is something that we will be doing. We'll get started probably in December. So I'm really excited about that, and I hope that the pilot works out and that is something that we can take to more areas of this state. So if you're wondering how to assess issues of equity in your own community, there are tools that are available. The Tree Equity Score is a tool that was developed by American Forest. It's really easy to use. There's also the Environmental Justice Screening Tool through the EPA. These are free for you to go and explore. And a new one that is being developed is the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. This is part of the Justice 40 initiative. So it's just now getting up and running. I accessed it earlier this week and it looks really interesting, but these are ways where you can see if green space equity is an issue in the communities where you live and work. And if it is, then maybe you can work to address it by connecting to one of these organizations I mentioned, or just by starting something on your own in your community. You can also look at census data to access these things. But what these tools are utilizing are census data, but they are providing the mapping resources for you. So they're much easier to navigate and to get information quickly. So I've talked a lot, and there are ways that you can engage after this. You can get involved with the organizations I mentioned. There are local initiatives that are happening all throughout our state. We have great organizations that are working to address children's access to green space. So get involved with a local agency if you have one. You can start your own. You can advocate in your own community. You can change your yard. You can advocate for policy changes, maybe at the state level, or you can advocate with the federal government. But one easy thing you can do is just continue learning about the importance of green space to humans in general and children, and spread the word to others so that maybe you don't have the capacity to go out and put forth action, But by spreading the word and getting other people excited, you can inspire someone to change the world. So that's all that I have for you today. Again, I will post references and links to the organizations that I talked about. Those will be available on the website when the PowerPoint is posted. But I am ready for any questions if you have any.
And if y'all have any questions, please post them in the chat. The first question, and you kind of mentioned this already, but what steps could I take right now to apply this information in my community?
Well, I mean, there's lots of different things that you can do. You can start, if you have a yard, you can start in your own yard and just make it a green space for the children that are in your own life or community. You can also work with your local school district and see if they have plans for greening those spaces. And if not, then how you could get involved. Maybe you have a tree board, or there's a Parks and Rec department or something where you can work with the school. So you can take this information to them and show how it helps academics and how it helps children in all these different ways and begin making plans in that way. So locally, those are some things you can do if your children go to childcare centers or you're a grandparent or something like that. You can also work with them to see if they want to plant trees. I know some people in Arkansas that they do tree plantings at childcare centers. It's through their division of forestry. So that's a great program, just ensuring that children have trees in their play spaces. So lots of different things that you can do in your local area. And if you don't want to do those actions, then just talking about the importance of green space can make a difference.
And like I said, you kind of mentioned, you talked about this a lot earlier, but how does the quality and quantity of green space make a specific impact on childhood development as they're growing up?
Right. Okay. So green space. So with that UNICEF definition, so a grassy lawn is considered green space. Well, obviously that does not offer as many benefits as a diverse yard that has lots of different trees and vegetation, or a park that has lots of diversity in species and in height. So you want diversity in canopy coverage, but also the types of plants. So just like a diverse, a park that has diversity offers more ecosystem services than just a grassy lawn. It's the same with children. Like the greater diversity, the more positive impact it will have upon them. And because children engage with their environment. So when you are in a grassy space, there's only so much engagement that you can have. So when you have diversity in the green spaces, there's many more opportunities for children to engage with those spaces. And through that play and engagement, they're learning. So it's benefiting them in a multitude of ways. So they have more sensorial experiences if they are in a woodland than they would just on a monoculture lawn. Does that make sense? Does that kind of answer your question? I don't have measurements, but yes, it is good to have diversity.
Great. Yes, thank you. Another question we just got is, how many square feet per child is recommended for green space?
Good question. I don't know, but I'll look it up. I will look it up and then I think they can post it. So how many square feet is recommended per child? Good question.
All right. Does anyone else have any questions they want to put into the chat?
And on that green space recommended for child, like in childcare centers, they're required to have a certain amount of square footage, like for the number of children in that space in Tennessee, but they don't necessarily require that to be green space. So I will look at how much is recommended for children.
We just got a question out of Memphis saying the Parks Department is in the process of taking some of the natural area of our Audubon Park and expanding the golf course. How can we convince our legislators, excuse me?
So the golf course is expanding into Audubon Park.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if it's already happening, I hate that is happening, but it's good to, I think it's good to approach people with positivity and openness, but also with facts. So I would figure out who is making those decisions, like who wants the golf course expanded, who is doing it, and I would talk with them. And I would also talk with the community on how important that space is to the people that use it. You can look and see if there are other parks that are really close in proximity. And if there's not, you can talk about that park serving the number of people in that community, and also the benefits that it has, the ecosystem services that that park offers to the city. I feel like oftentimes municipalities are motivated by how spaces serve them, whether it be through stormwater reduction, or, I mean, if you can always orient it to money, like a financial reason to keep that space. So measuring the ecosystem services that the park offers and how that will be different than what the golf course offers may be one form. But just talking to people and letting them know you care is the first point of action. Just make your concerns known.
Okay, and just a couple more. Are the children allowed to climb trees or encouraged to climb in these green spaces?
Well, I mean, I encourage my children to climb trees, and because I think it's really important. However, I know some people don't like children to climb trees, but I think it's really good for them. And I think climbing trees is super fun. However, children are typically not encouraged to climb trees in childcare settings and at schools due to issues with safety. And so in green spaces like parks, yeah, I think children should be able to climb trees personally, but I guess that's up to whoever's watching the children.
And did you find your development related to autistic children in your research?
Yes, they have said that. I read this one thing, but I did not dig into it. They said that areas with higher green space have lower rates of autism, but I did not dig into that, and I want to before I even think about that. But I did read that children with autism benefit from green spaces, and especially, what was this? It was like, if you're thinking about autism, like sometimes there are behavioral issues or issues with social interaction and things like that. And so green spaces were found to help children with autism in regulating these behaviors. But the one about autism numbers, like I said, I didn't get to read that article, so I am not sure about that. But there are benefits to children with autism, and it can be calming because children with autism oftentimes have issues with their senses. So they can be overly sensitive or underly sensitive to light, sound, things like that. And being in the natural world can help these things be more regulated.
Okay, well, I think that's all the questions. Neil, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, Katie, thank you. And going back to the Memphis question and the golf course, it reminded me that children don't vote, but parents do, and children need advocates for them that politicians will listen to and that they can have some influence. So that would be my one little input on that. Ashley, this was a super presentation, and you did not have enough time to cover all the aspects of this, but what you did cover really did reach all of us, and I think it helped enlighten us to this important dimension of the green space and the impact on children's health. And so I really want to thank you for that.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.